Hello class, my name is Dusan Nikolic and I will be teaching you Linguistic Anthropology 1106. I'm very excited to start, and this is our first lecture. So let's start with a definition of linguistic anthropology, or at least a working definition. This definition will be extended and developed and modified as we go through the course. So linguistic anthropology is a branch of anthropology that studies the nature of languages in the context of those cultures that develop them. So basically, language and culture are inseparable. And there is an author whose textbook I indicated in the syllabus as well. Her last name is Ahern, and she wrote a book on living languages. And the author says that the essence of language cannot be understood without reference to the particular social context in which it is used, but those contexts do not stand apart from linguistic practices or somehow contain them, as a soup bowl would contain soup. So basically, it's not simply a soup bowl. When you eat this soup, there is nothing in there anymore, and it only contains linguistic practices. No, it's much more complex than that. These two, society and linguistics or languages, are very much interconnected. And there is, of course, the other part of this quote, and that is that rather social contexts and linguistic practices mutually constitute each other. For this reason, language should be studied. Alessandro Duranti writes, and Alessandro Duranti is as well another big author, another big anthropologist in the field, not only as a mode of thinking, but above all as a cultural practice, that is, as a form of action that both presupposes and at the same time brings about ways of being in the world. So language, basically, as we will see a little bit later, can shape the way culture is understood and the other way around. And there is no culture without language, or language without culture as well. So these are very much interconnected. It is not just about this soup bowl right here. All right. Some of the questions that we will address in this course are the following. How can language and culture be adequately described? Do other animals show linguistic capacities? We'll see. How did language originate? How did it contribute to human evolution and the development of culture? How are languages acquired? How can languages be classified to show the relationships among them? What is the relationship between language and thought? What is meaning? And what does it mean to be human, of course? Is language a defining quality of humans? Well, we'll see in this course, so stay tuned, of course. We will also work on many statements throughout the course, and there is a specific statement that says some languages are naturally more primitive than others. There is another statement that says some languages have less grammar than others. Some languages have simpler vocabulary than others. So what do you think? Are these true? And you can pause the video here just to think about these statements. But let me tell you the answer. Not really. They are not true. But you can also think about why not? Why are they not true? And we will try to answer these questions, or better to say or describe, explain why these statements are not true. First of all, languages cannot be primitive. That's one of the things. There are certain languages that perhaps were, not perhaps, but most certainly were different than other languages, than more contemporary languages. And there are languages that have lower number of vowels or higher number of consonants, or perhaps lower number of words for computer, for beer, for snow, or whatnot. But that doesn't mean that they are primitive. Then there are some languages that have less grammar than others. That's also not true. Grammar is quite relative term. Grammar is different, simply different. And some languages have a simpler vocabulary than others. Again, not true. Most of the languages have different types of words and word formations, and we will talk about some of them throughout this course. So we are here to dispel certain misconceptions that are out there in the world. More importantly, why should we care? Well, we care because underneath all these assumptions is a post-colonial, or let's say colonial thought trying to minimize the value of certain cultures and uplift the value of other cultures. And that has always been the case. So pay attention and try to be observant. Do not simply accept this, let's say, English-centric view of the world. And that this is a nice comic or just an illustration of Yoda's thinking, Yoda from Star Wars, whereby Luke says, "Dude, why do you talk backwards all the time?" And Yoda answers backwards, talking, "I'm not." English-centric view of grammatical structure you have, which is true. For Yoda, this is perfectly natural. It's not backwards talking. So be observant. We are speaking English right now. We are communicating in English, but we have to change the perspectives in order to understand different types of cultures, societies, and of course, the language role within these. Of course, as you know, we will be studying linguistic anthropology. So you know that anthropologists are people who usually show up in a hat and take some photos, write down some notes of certain societies, what they see. This is in a way true, so it's not a complete myth, right? This is true. There is some truth to it, but anthropology is much more complex than that. In the same way, when I say I'm a linguist, people ask me how many languages do you speak? And I tell them jokingly, I speak all the languages in the world, which is of course impossible. So our job is not to speak languages, all the languages, it's to study the structure of language. And we'll see what that is. But let's first focus on anthropologies. And of course, we are here to debunk most of these myths. And where do we start? Well, we start with a person who basically invented or introduced the originator of linguistic anthropology. Franz Boas shaped the study of anthropology in North America, so mainly in America, although he was German. Boas held the first academic position in anthropology in the US. He authored and edited a lot of publications on Native American music, art, folklore, languages, studies in culture theory, biology, and so on and so forth. He edited the first volume of Handbook of American Indian Languages. That's how they were called back then. And Boas left a huge legacy to the study of anthropology, of course. And we need to remember his name, of course, because he was the originator of linguistic anthropology mainly, but also of linguistic anthropology. And as you can see here, he lived mainly in he lived a very long life in the 19th and the 20th century. So he was basically a male person. We will talk about a lot of males in this class because they held these positions, these academic positions back in the days most of the time, right? So we cannot skip that part, unfortunately. We want, of course, to have as many women, even more so today than men in the field. But in those days, those were mainly males. And there is a legacy that Franz Boas has, and I want to play to you something that is available on YouTube, and it's called The Shackles of Tradition. It's a documentary about Boas. I won't play the whole thing. You can watch it at home on your own, but I want to play this part which speaks about language. Let's see, maybe I can do this.
During his visits to Fort Rupert, up on the northern tip of Vancouver Island, Boas became aware of the importance of language.
In the beginning, it was always hard work to ask about the language. Such a confusion of dialects and languages exist here that the material overwhelms me. The Kwakiutl language is much harder than I thought. I work on the grammar in the mornings, and in the afternoon old fellas tell me stories. And in the evening, when George Hunt is free, I revise texts with him.
But Boas realized that language was more than simply a means for making yourself understood. He was becoming aware of the role of language as a vehicle for transmitting cultural identity itself. The old people remember Boas speaking Kwakwala well, but with a heavy accent. He understood that as well as customs and objects, language was also part of the essence of the life of a culture.
Okay, we wish sit ya.
Sit ya.
Would you see you
Here.
Kogume? Sit ya.
Sit ya.
Is hair. Shoes.
Shoes.
Head. Kogume.
Face.
Aan.
An.
Eyebrows. Kayakas.
Kayagas.
As for you.
Espayu.
Hinzas.
Today, although it isn't the first language of most Kwakiutl children, it is at least being taught. And Boas himself was teaching that language, like each aspect of the culture being studied, was an essential part in the understanding of social worlds that were so dramatically different from his own.
Yeah, so yes, language is a vehicle which we use to investigate culture, and the other way around, of course. Culture in society or cultural practices are also connected, very much shaping the language that we use, and we will see that throughout this course. And as you could see or hear, Boas was trying to speak Kwakiutl language. That's not really the language right now, it's Kwakiutl people, but Kwakwala is the language, and it's an indigenous language mainly present in the Vancouver Island, right? One of the Vakashan languages, or from the Vakashan language family. And you might have heard that children were repeating certain words, such as an, which means eyes, and that is what we call reduplication in linguistics. So basically the whole form is repeated again. It's like saying eyes, or I, meaning two eyes, right? An. And this is where linguists can help with, right? Your knowledge of linguistics will be important here. There's another legacy of Boas, right? And that's Edward Sapir. That's Boas. Edward Sapir was his student, and one of the most accomplished linguists and anthropologists. So while Boas is mainly responsible for anthropology and the father of anthropology, so to say, Edward Sapir could be called a father of linguistic anthropology. His seminal work called Language was one of the first linguistics book written for a popular audience, which was very important. And he was quite prolific, as you can see, with more than 7,000 pages of work produced. In these days, that would be impossible. He was mainly working on Native American languages such as Yana, Wisham, Chinook, Navajo, etc. And I have a colleague who is working today on languages such as Yana language as well, which is very exciting. We will talk about Sapir more in the second part of the course, I think, but there is one of the Sapir's legacies is linguistic relativism, and Sapir and his students, specifically Benjamin Lee Worf, were responsible for basically introducing into the field linguistic, what we call today linguistic relativism. And that's the proposal that particular language one speaks influences the way one thinks about reality. Think about that, right? Grammatical structures of different languages imply different conceptions of reality. And let me give you an example. In Stony Nakota, language here spoken in Calgary or areas around Calgary, there's only one word for blue and green, and that's the word to. Yeah. Does that mean that they can not tell between the two colors? Perhaps. Does that mean that they cannot learn a word for blue and green in other languages? That's something to ask, of course, and we will talk about that as in the second part of this course. In Russian, there are two words for blue, for example, siniy and goluboy, and basically they can distinguish between varieties, these two varieties of blue. I think that, I'm not sure, I might be mistaken, but you can check that. Siniy is probably dark blue, and this is light blue or something like that. So yeah, that is something that to remember, and those are the legacies of these two scholars. But a question that we need to ask, is anthropology necessary? And that's something that you have in your books as well. Well, anatomy, history, political science, economics, literature, sociology are also concerned with human condition. But they're concerned with human condition in a different way. Why would there be a need for such a broad discipline as anthropology? Well, there is a weak claim that it studies the subject that were not already claimed. Okay, perhaps. But a more important claim is that it explains the diversity of race, language, and culture, past and present. So basically what happened in the past and what is happening right now. And all of these are very much interconnected. While these sciences can venture into language a little bit, they don't do that as linguistic anthropology, for example. Or political sciences don't do that as well so much. They don't dwell on race, language, and culture. Sociology even, it dwells on societies rather than race, language, and culture. So basically, there is a need for this area, and this area is famous for its fieldwork component augmented by lab work. Fieldwork actually brought fame to this area much more than these other branches or these other areas of human condition, such as history, political science, economics, and literature, and so on and so forth, where fieldwork is present, but not to that extent, for sure. Not to that extent. Fieldwork component in anthropology is one of the main components, and hopefully I can show you that in some of the next classes when we meet. There are four general anthropology subfields that I want you to know about. That's biological anthropology, that studies the relationship between culture and disease, behavior or non-human primates, and so on and so forth. Cultural anthropology studies not only tribal societies, bands of hunter-gatherers, but also post-industrial modern societies. Archaeology surveys land for sites, excavations, and remains of past cultures. And linguistic anthropology studies the relationship between language, society, and culture. Right. More specialized subfields, are political, economic, urban, medical, legal, psychological. I won't get into these. You just need to sort of know that they exist. But I want you to understand what these four are and what they cover. We will, of course, be concerned with linguistic anthropology mainly. And there are, in terms of myths that we need to debunk, I want to play to you another video clip, and I want to ask you what kind of anthropology is this? This is from a show called Community, and in this show, I didn't see the show actually, so I cannot retell what's happening. But they have a class of seemingly anthropology. Let's see.
How Paleolithic hunting tribes overtook early agricultural civilizations.
Oh, that's an interesting answer, Miss Edison.
Is it right?
I don't know. Don't care. But so far, you're all getting A's.
Are you sure everyone should get A's? It seems a little unfair to the people that actually studied.
Throw paper balls at her head until she sits down.
Sitting.
Good. Very good. A+'s for all of you.
Professor Duncan, you are such a great teacher when you're drinking.
Thank you, Daryl.
It's Troy. Hey, the man wants to give Daryl an A, let him do it. Nice shot.
Oh, thanks.
A toast to the easiest school, the dumbest dean.
And the ultimate blow-off class, Anthropology. Who knew? Woo!
Cheers.
Yeah, there is a little bit of that back and forth, and let's go here.
Awesome is it that this class is fake?
Yeah!
Here is to never telling the dean.
Hi!
And that is what Jews do at weddings. Anthropology.
I noticed.
All right, I want to play you another video clip of a famous show, popular show, Friends. This is the show that I've watched many times, and let's see what happens here.
You've picked out a lot of our dinosaur items.
Oh, yeah. Actually, that's one of the reasons why we are not a couple.
I chose those. I'm a paleontologist.
Really? That is so cool.
Oh, yeah, don't get too worked up over it. I mean, it sounds like he's a doctor, but he's not.
Oh, no, I'm fascinated by paleontology. Have you read the new Walter Alvarez book?
Yeah, I teach it in my class.
Oh, my God. Standing at a cash register, I'm holding a credit card, and I'm bored.
Oh, I love your neighborhood. There's a great gym right around the corner from your building.
That's my gym.
I could tell you work out. Paleontologist who works out. You're like Indiana Jones.
I am like Indiana Jones.
Yeah, not really, right? That's the point of this. Not really. He's not Indiana Jones. He studies paleontology. Indiana Jones was a professor of archaeology, and we have a professor of archaeology. And let me tell you, his name is Max at the department, and he helped me, for example, print out some handouts for you. So that's what they do, actually. I'm joking, of course. There is a lot more that they do, and we are here to debunk some of the myths and some of the myths about linguists. So we talked about anthropology and what it is. We've seen its branches, but what about linguistic anthropology, or linguistics, so to say? So in this class we will use the term linguistic anthropology instead of anthropological linguistics. Just a little digression, because that would mean that non-human species have language. So anthropological linguistics would mean that there is avian linguistics, or I know, dino linguistics, right? But there other species don't have languages, as we will see. They have means of communication, but not really a language. Linguistics. What's linguistics? It comes from the Latin word lingua, which means tongue or language, but mainly tongue, and that's how it got its extended meaning. It's a scientific study of language, but not a specific language. Analytical study of language as a whole, right? As a structure. But what do we know about language? That's something to think about, of course. Maybe pause and think about, and write down some of your thoughts. What we know about language as linguists is that language is biological. It's uniquely human. Every child acquires language. Every human society uses language for communication. All languages share certain features in common, and there are certain features not found in language, which is pretty interesting. So found in some other ways of communicating. Language forms a part of your brain. So this is what means to be biological. Basically, it is a part of your brain. We have certain neurons that are specifically intended or have function to produce language, to perceive language, to understand language, right? Language is very complex. Every language has a system of rules for constructing syllables, words, and sentences. And that's what we call the grammar of that language. All grammars are equal, so remember that. There is no better or worse grammar. Knowing the language means knowing these rules. The knowledge is mostly subconscious, and by this we mean you don't know what you know, and that's what Noam Chomsky called linguistic competence, in contrast to the actual use of language in context, which is linguistic performance, how you use language. How do we know it's subconscious? Well, basically, if you ask yourselves, what is the plural of the word wug, you're most likely to say wugs. This word does not exist, but you have this subconscious knowledge of these rules that you acquired of English, for example, or any other language, Yoruba, Igbo, Mandarin, Farsi, and so on and so forth. So you have the knowledge of these rules internally, and you acquire them as you grew up, right? And we try to figure out what these rules are. So, for example, we know that some possible English words are pleb, forge, big, shump, stas, hibber, krong, trap. But impossible English words, of course, this is a wordplay. Please do not use unpossible in your exams. Impossible is not a good word, a grammatical word in English. It's just a joke. Impossible English words are mort, glisik, mak, misil, lash, spin, gotch, ptud. These are impossible because there are no words that start with these sounds. Glis. Maybe in other languages. In my language, Serbian, yes, probably they do. Not really. Zp, not really. Vla, very often. Vladimir, right? Not the best name, but it's out there. Pt, yeah, that there is. Ptice, for example, word as birds in my language. So in other languages, these rules are a little bit different, but you would know that subconsciously, right? Some acceptable English sentences are, who do you think Tom is shouting at? Who do you think that Tom is shouting at? Who do you think is shouting at Harry? But an unacceptable English sentence would be, who do you think that is shouting at Harry? And you would know that immediately, right? If I ask you to. So that's your linguistic competence. We want to be scientific. We want to be observant. Language is all around you, and people use it all the time. Have an open mind. Have an open mind and observe. Right? Our job as linguists is to describe, not to judge. When you have judgment, then science stops there. All languages are equally complex, and that's what we call linguistic equality. All languages are systematic. That's why we know they're rule-based. So there is a principle to each language. They're not chaotic, right? There are some principles. Not everything goes, right? As we saw just in English. You cannot just have any kind of sentence or any kind of word. Linguistics is not about learning how to speak the right way, but it's about finding general truths about language and figuring out the rules of language, right? And pay attention to linguistic equality as a term that is also very important, because all languages are equally complex, and linguistic anthropology, or linguistics in general, is very humane science, so to say, because it treats every language equally, right? Just like we want to treat every person fairly. We know about language that it's creative. It enables you to say things you have never heard before. For example, we stan Harry Styles. If Harry Styles is still a thing, right? I'm not sure, but this word stan is relatively new. It's not that new anymore. There are even some newer words, I guess, these days, but yeah, this is one of them. His Facebook picture makes me lol. So basically, we didn't have Facebook many years ago. Lulls as well, we didn't have that. language is creative mainly in terms of words. It invents lots of words and phrases, such as social distancing. This is quite contradictory. How can you be social and still distance, right? But that's something that evolved because of the circumstances. Ghosting as well. Ghosting didn't used to exist in this way. That's sick, which means that's great in a way. So sick would not mean that in the past, and it's in its literal form. So one of the things to mention here is language is learned from environment, but not just from the environment. Language is partly innate, so pay attention to that, because we definitely need the environment to learn it, but we also need to because language is biological, we also need to inherit this, and we all do. We also know that language can be arbitrary, meaning that there is no reason why tree is a tree, and in another language is drvo, and in another language is abe. So there is no reason for that. This is completely arbitrary, meaning that there is no determining factor why certain set of sounds mean that, right? And that's what we call linguistic indeterminacy, right? Every language varies according to region, speaker, identity, and situation. Language can define communities and can shape identities, and that's what we call linguistic determinism. So yes, language can definitely influence communities and identities, and that's why it's important to preserve it. That's what we are doing with language and preservation and documentation. We preserve also identities. Very important work. The first part of this class will be devoted, we will talk about some methods in linguistic anthropology in the next class, but the first part of this course will be devoted to learning how to analyze and understand the structures of language. And the first thing we will talk about is phonetics. What sounds are used in speech? How do we make those sounds? What's the best way to write down what a person has actually said? Which alphabet, right? Then phonology, which is a branch of linguistics that deals with sounds, but it wants to understand the rules in which sounds are related to one another, how they are positioned within a syllable, right? What distinguishes one sound from another? What rules do languages use to put sounds together into words? Then word structure, meaning morphology. Morphology is a branch of linguistics that deals with the smallest units of meaning, such as some prefixes, suffixes, infixes, and so on. We'll learn about that, of course. How are words formed in language, and what word formation processes exist. We will talk about syntax. How does language combine words into sentences? How do sentences relate to one another? And how do the rules of word order differ from one language to another? Some languages might have like English-centric view, right? Some languages might have Yoda-centric view, or the language that Yoda speaks, at least. So most of the languages are actually not like English, which is surprising but good to know, right?